Thank you, Gasali. Our next guest is Dalee Sambo. He is Inuit from Alaska, is the international chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. She engaged for over 34 years as the UN, ILO, OAS, as other international fora. She's a former expert member and chairperson of the UNPFII and specialized in international indigenous human rights law, as well as political and legal relations between states and indigenous people, and is also co-chair of the International Law Association Committee of the Implementation of the Indigenous Rights. Welcome, Dalee.
Dalee, welcome. I have to admit, when I had to chair some meetings as from a caucus, one of the persons that I look up to is the way that you the way that you chaired the Peru Forum. That was inspirational. So very much thank you for that. Let me first jump right into the first question. What are some of the challenges that you as international chair of ICC are facing in terms of governance and representation, given that the Inuit territory spans across a number of states? So what do you keep in mind when you're speaking on behalf of the ICC?
Yana, thank you so much, Ghazali. First, let me say it's very early in the morning here. I tuned in at 5 a.m. So, and I haven't had a cup of coffee as I thought I might be able to have the chance to. This is in the hopes that I can actually fall asleep again. The program is excellent, and in terms of your specific question, indeed, the Inuit, our membership, our traditional territories and homelands spread from Chukotka and the Russian Far East throughout Alaska, Canada, and Greenland. And I think your question really brings to mind the diversity of the respective nation states that we have to deal with, who are, of course, UN member states as well. And it is quite significant that the Russian Federation, as a UN member state, but also a member of the Security Council, the United States government, the government of Canada, and the government of Denmark. So not only is it the conditions of these very distinct nation states that we have to deal with, that our membership, Inuit, our blood relations across these four countries have to deal with, but to be mindful of not only the circumpolar region politics and Arctic region politics, but now global politics in terms of those respective nation states. And so that's a major challenge. In addition, of course, language. And immediately, and I'm really pleased to see the Spanish-speaking opportunity here, the interpretation, the technology that supports that. But we have real difficulties and challenges with the use of the Russian language in our communications with the 2,000 or so Siberian Yupik who are members in Chukotka. So that's significant. The other dimension to all of this is the uneven treatment of the rights of our membership across these different national governments. And I think we go from, for example, the conditions in Greenland, where there's been peaceful dialogue for some time about the exercise of the right of self-determination and the real future of Greenland, the potential independence of Greenland, and the situation and circumstance for our membership in the Russian Federation, where there's direct and overt control of everything that they do in their day-to-day lives, and the ability for them to freely take on engagement at the United Nations, for example, or for our organization as the Inuit Circumpolar Council to provide support to them, provide financial support to them without being labeled as foreign agents. And these are very real challenges. And in terms of your second question about what to keep in mind when speaking on behalf of the ICC, that's a little easier to deal with because we have a fairly well-developed leadership process. We have our general assemblies. Our executive council is composed of membership from each of the 4 regions in the Arctic. We occupy, in terms of our traditional homeland, just over 40% of the Arctic region. We view that in a holistic fashion. The decision-making that we undertake is collectively and together. So there are challenges in terms of representation at the international level, but at the same time, we have a very good way of bringing forward the Inuit voice in a wide range of intergovernmental and other international fora.
Dalee, I know for a fact that you're a very strong supporter of the right to self-determination. You talk a lot about that during that Perm Forum and other contexts. Having also listened to or talked to Professor Megan Davis, your colleague, former colleague at the Perm Forum, she alluded to that we don't talk about self-determination anymore, as not as much as we should be, and more about free, prior, informed consent, FPIC. What, in your mind, in your view, what debates or what do we need to do to bring it back?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that it's important for us to recognize that all of the provisions of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are sourced in self-determination, right? Self-determination is understood to be the prerequisite to the exercise and the enjoyment of all other human rights. And so when we are talking about our food security, when we are talking about our rights to lands, territories, and resources, when we are talking about the right to free, prior, and informed consent, when we're talking about the right to control our own educational institutions, we are really talking about expressing our right to self-determination in many different contexts. And so I think that if we understand that free, prior, and informed consent is sourced in the right of self-determination, that it takes on and is imbued with an even more significant cultural context on the part of Indigenous peoples. I think that it really underscores how inseparable self-determination is from every action of advocacy that we as Indigenous peoples individually or collectively undertake at all different scales, at the local level, at the regional level, the national level, and at the international level. And I think that there's been probably more discussion about the right of self-determination in the efforts of Indigenous peoples at the national or the domestic level, so maybe less so in terms of the huge debates that we had throughout the negotiation of the UN Declaration. I heard Kenneth Deer speak earlier about those significant debates and how much time was consumed on just resolving the issue of the right of self-determination. So potentially at the national and the domestic level, where the the provisions of the UN Declaration, or where the rubber hits the road in terms of resolving and redefining and reorienting and reconceptualizing the relationship between Indigenous peoples and nation states, that more of this dialogue is taking place. And it's largely because of the denial of the right of self-determination, the lack of explicit recognition of and respect for the right of self-determination by national governments, that has created the need to have a debate, the need to have a discussion. So in my view, more power to the Indigenous peoples at the local and the national level who are bringing these issues forward in an intellectually honest fashion, and willing to engage in the discussion about how to accommodate Indigenous peoples.
Dalee, one question actually that's been emerging not only in meetings with states, but like in general, is about the rights of Indigenous people. People don't understand what it is. Well, they do understand, and I'm talking about non-Indigenous peoples. What is the biggest misunderstanding states have about Indigenous people's rights?
I think that that hasn't changed much over the nearly 40, 50 years, or however long we've been doing this. I can't count anymore. I think that the fear that the sky will fall if in fact they recognize and respect our rights, our fundamental human rights. And I think that self-determination is an example of that the unwillingness to recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples in whatever context and discrete dialogue that may be undertaken. The idea that, and maybe it really comes from, they don't know any better, because they've just taken the attitude that they have the power to decide and impose upon us, to control us, to own us. You know, you hear that often in statements for the U.S. is very well known for this, that our Indigenous peoples, you know, this and that's a big misunderstanding in and of itself, as though we're subjects to be owned, and that they have the power to do with us whatever they want to do, overlooking entirely our rights, including the right of self-determination. I think that some of the other misunderstandings about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People specifically is that somehow this important international human rights instrument creates new rights, when in fact we're talking about pre-existing or inherent rights that we have held long before the emergence of the modern nation state in international law, in international affairs. And I think this is another huge misconception, misunderstanding on the part of states, that these pre-existing or inherent rights have been important to Indigenous peoples well before contact, and that they remain important to Indigenous peoples and our very survival as distinct peoples on the planet. So I think that there are probably many, many other misunderstandings that I could point to, but really in the end of the day, I think that much of it pivots on this notion of the primacy of the nation state, and the primacy of their political institutions in all affairs, political or legal or cultural, and in a wide range of ways. So it's hard to pinpoint any one. particular misunderstanding, but I think that it's pretty clear that there are a wide range of them. Otherwise, Indigenous peoples would be enjoying and exercising their human rights. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're now also a member to the facilitative working group on under the UNFCCC, so on climate change, which is on the platform on traditional knowledge. There's a rise, quote unquote, rise of traditional knowledge. UNFCCC, BBNJ, what we also talk about a little bit offline. Yeah, there's a rise. Are you excited or concerned?
Let's see, first let me say that myself and the Inuit Circumpolar Council and the discussions that we've had about this important topic have settled on the use of the term Indigenous knowledge for a host of different reasons. That the knowledge that we have accumulated certainly is based upon traditional practices, but it represents the knowledge that we hold here and now, and knowledge that we'll accumulate into the future, and that it attaches to us and our identity as Indigenous peoples. I think that it is exciting might not be the term, but I think that it's important that the international community, that the world community, and specifically the different treaty arenas that have emerged around us, like the UNFCCC, are interested in Indigenous perspectives and in Indigenous knowledge. I think it's very, very important, but I don't think that they completely understand what we're talking about. You know, that we have systematic ways of knowing that based upon observations and skill, and you know, they're not quite sure what we're talking about. And I think in large part because of that, it's been extremely helpful for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for example, to recognize in their special report on oceans and the cryosphere, to underscore the significance of the knowledge that Inuit have to sea ice and conditions within our unique environment, Inuit and Nunat, the environment that we know so much about, based upon generations of accumulated and intricate and highly developed and sophisticated knowledge. And even it conjures up the quote from Eben Hobson, who's recognized as the founder of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, who stated in 1977, when we gathered together to organize the ICC, that our language contains the intricate knowledge of the ice that we have seen no others demonstrate. And this remains true to this day. So I think that, you know, for now, the IPCC's report and the opportunity to uplift the knowledge that we do have in order to find solutions to the problems that all of humanity is facing is significant. I am concerned, however, about the idea that, oh yeah, we can just create a big depository of all the knowledge of Indigenous peoples and make it available for anybody to Google by keyword, and you know, grabbing and taking knowledge out of context and applying it out of context and misusing it, abusing it, or exploiting it, and the notions of Western science and how they treat Indigenous knowledge. I'm deeply concerned about that. So when you mention the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform of the UNFCCC and the facilitative working group as a constitutive body in that process, that we create the safeguards and protect the rights of Indigenous peoples to their knowledge, as well as their right to maintain and control how that knowledge is used. And that ultimately will allow for real respect for and recognition of Indigenous knowledge holders. And so in terms of the future of the co-production of knowledge with Indigenous peoples, there's a host of guidelines and protocols that have to be developed in order to really achieve ethical co-production of knowledge. So I think there are avenues and opportunities, but at the same time, we need respect for guidelines and protocols and the safeguarding of our knowledge.
Thank you so much, Dalee. I know we can talk a lot longer about this, but it's very early over there, and so hopefully, yeah, you brought a lot of value to the whole episode and then to the whole series. Thank you so much, and definitely looking forward to talking more about like everything that we just talked about. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ghazali. And I hope that before you cut me off, I hope that at some point in time we can tackle the issue of local communities, because I think this problematic.
Go ahead. Like, we have a little bit more time. So is that local communities, Indigenous peoples, what is the nuance? What is it, something that you want to tackle on that?
Well, I think that as has been indicated by the and Graeme was instrumental in this, the letter that was sent from the Indigenous Peoples Forum on climate change to others within the whole UNFCCC system about the need for a clear and explicit distinction between Indigenous peoples and local communities is absolutely crucial. And that letter highlighted the need that, you know, the system, and in particular nation state, the parties within that treaty cannot equate the rights of Indigenous peoples to local communities. That there, and in fact, my reference to pre-existing or inherent rights is one of the key elements of the distinctions between so-called local communities, and we're not sure who they are and where they are. My guess is that it has emerged because there are governments that refuse to accept that there are Indigenous peoples within their set state territories. That's a different argument. That's a different matter when you have non-recognition of Indigenous peoples. But to then bring on a term like local communities without fully understanding the history, the source, the content of the rights of Indigenous peoples, the pre-existing rights, the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples, especially to self-determination, our collective political right to self-determination, as well as our rights to lands, territories, and resources, which is a very distinct cluster of rights that is highly significant to Indigenous peoples, that a distinction has to be made, and it has to be understood in order for us to safeguard the integrity of the rights that have been affirmed in the UN Declaration, for example. And again, local communities, we're uncertain of what's being talked about here. There is no definition in the UNFCCC context. I haven't seen a crowd of local community representatives, you know, have a caucus meeting or a dialogue or discussion and insert themselves in a way that that is significant and important to Indigenous peoples. There's much more that I could say about this, but I do know that you have other guests that you're inviting to the program. But I think it's an area that we have to watch very closely in terms of developments, especially when there's an attempt by others to link rights to so-called local communities and to utilize it in a way that would undermine or diminish the rights, the hard-fought rights and the recognition of those rights by the international community in the form of the UN declarations. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words about that, but I also, again, Kiana. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dalee. Thank you for interrupting me so you can talk about this, because I've been seeing it emerge, the whole discussion all over the world in terms of like the different processes. So I think this is definitely very valuable. Thank you so much for cutting me off and talk about this. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Hoka,